Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mark Bell's Power Project Podcast. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by our homies at Free Sleeve.
You know, the funny thing is the other day I was looking up LeBron James recovery because you know how that guy spends millions of dollars on his body. And I saw pictures of like ice packs on his knees. Like it's like ice plastic bags around his knees.
I thought he was the best.
But you know, the funny thing is like the Free Sleeve, it's this latex free ice sleeve that you can literally put on your elbows. You can put it on your knees. And it's so dope because after a training session, I go home, I do my thing. I pull the Free Sleeve out of the freezer, put it on my knees, put it on my elbows, walk around, do my nightly routine. I'm not stuck sitting down with stuff on my knees and elbows. I take it off. I feel great. I go to sleep. It's perfect.
So what you're saying is you don't ice your body the way that caveman would do it back in the day.
Pro athletes these days, man. Shame on them.
You guys need to upgrade your ice packs right now by heading over to freesleeve.com. That's freezesleeve.com at checkout. Enter promo code POWER25 for 25% off your order and free domestic shipping.
Hello. Make sure you mute this guy.
Yeah, just don't turn this mic on. I can still hear myself, so you should probably turn it off.
There we go. So you guys are not getting baked on this one, or
I'm going to do half.
Half, which is a one serving.
Which is one serving too many already.
Oh, man.
Yeah, last show we got into it.
God.
Cheers. There you go. And one down the hatch and another down the hatch.
Yeah. I'm going to save the other half for before training today. I like training with this stuff.
Remember yesterday he had that extra noise in there.
Yeah. There was an extra like pop. Yeah. What?
It was I don't know.
Yeah, it was like that.
I don't, but I didn't.
It's like you popped your cherry. Something like that.
Yeah, it was. I think because like it was the bottle. I don't know what it was.
Something with a bottle. Yeah, but
it was something nice. With his lips.
Nice sound.
So I've been walking with my dad every day, and that's been going good.
Hell yeah.
And then my brother's been joining in on some of those walks too. And my dad, the first couple days, he was, lumbering around. That wasn't moving too quick, and we couldn't go very far. And each day he got a little bit better, was moving a little faster. And then he's been lifting in the gym too. Lauren Pappas, the Fit DJ, she's been training him up.
Nice.
And so he's been doing a little bit of lifting as well. And that's been going good. But then he's also had like a little bit of a setback. So like today, his calf was bothering him a lot. So he's kind of like limping, but he's like, getting through it. And I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's a good illustration of what happens a lot of times when you start something new. You start getting involved in something new and you're like, oh, wow, okay, that was cool. That was a lot of fun. First go of it feels pretty good. And then you might get like sore. You might get tired. You might get beat up. You might, even just with exercise, you might just be a lot more hungry. So your diet might not be great in the beginning. And you got to figure out a way to just, keep it going, keep that streak going. And my dad's doing a good job of that. So super proud of him. And it's been a lot of fun. And it's an interesting dynamic when he and I walk together. We don't need to talk. So we just walk a lot. And then when my brother's there, my brother likes to talk. And so he'll chat it up with my dad. My dad likes to talk a lot too. So we'll get in some good conversation. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It's really good. That's honestly though, like I think it's kind of what we were talking about yesterday. When you do start something new, it's you have all this momentum, but there will be something that's going to set you back, and your mind can either go to the spot of shoot, maybe I need to stop, or what can I do to maybe get around this a little bit. Right. So maybe you just walk a shorter distance, or just do something else that's still kind of physical. You could still get something in. You could still get something done. So that's awesome.
Well, and also, too, I don't think he'd be walking out there with his calf hurt if we weren't all doing it together. And so having some sort of extra accountability, I think, is helpful. You have people to do stuff with. That can be huge. On today's show, we got Jordan Shallow on the show, and chiropractor, powerlifter. And it'd be great to get into some conversation with him. I know he's worked with a lot of different types of people. He works for EliteFTS.com, who we have a lot of their products in our gym, and I've done work with them as well over the years. And it'll be cool to talk to him about chiropractic. I know he's worked with like rugby players and stuff, and I kind of wonder like what those guys need. Like that sport seems brutal. You know, what those guys need, how they recover from their games and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of cool stuff to get into, and even talk about chiropractic. You know, what are your guys' thoughts? You guys ever had success with chiropractors?
So my first experience, I was, friends in high school, and we got rear-ended pretty bad.
Oh,
Like really bad.
In a car.
Correct. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, we were in a car. It was, dude,
it's been rough.
it was really rough.
Got rear-ended.
But then get this, the truck that hit us, they just start running.
Oh God.
Uh-oh. And they had like half a cow slaughtered in the back of their truck, beer everywhere. I was like, oh, that's why they're running. Anyway, so that was a little sidebar.
Wait, really? Half a cow? Like,
Yeah. They like went and poached. I think that's the right word. They just like went and slaughtered a cow and just took off.
Wow.
I know. So I'd imagine their insurance wasn't up to, wasn't renewed or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
Wasn't active.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I don't even think it was their car. So like the owners, we were technically suing them, that sort of thing. And so like, oh, if, we need to show that you guys are actually in pain. So you got to go to the chiropractor. And I swear every time I went, I was just in so much pain. I'm like, this is not working.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to like, training and stuff. And like now, like I do like going, like I like getting everything cracked and stuff, but it's not, I don't know, like I feel good afterwards. But I think it's because I'm not going in with like a super bad chronic thing, like with my back. Sometimes I'll leave and I'll be like, damn, I don't know if that did the job for me. Mm-hmm. But like when I go see Dan here at Movement Matters in Sacramento, like I feel pretty damn good after that. He has some cool tricks, but it's more of like active release than it is straight chiropractor.
Like ART?
Yeah.
I think that's important to have, that your chiropractor does more than just,
Correct.
The snap, crackle, pop type of deal.
Yeah. And sorry to cut you off, but so I've had really bad chiropractors in the past. Like my wife and I would go and she would have like a carpal tunnel or a shoulder thing. And he'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And, snap, crackle, pop. And I'm like, yeah, dude, my back's jacked. Okay, so I think this is what's happening. So here's what we're going to do. And did the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. She's like, but her wrist, why are you doing the exact same treatment on me?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we're going to hook you up to this TENS unit and then we're going to, do this. And then, someone like Dan, he'll look at you and be like, oh, your right leg is standing up or longer than your left leg. So let's pull on the left one. And then he'll look at you and be like, oh, your back's not, doesn't need attention on this side. So we're not going to just crack you just because.
Yeah.
So you're right, Mark. Like if they have some extra tools in their tool belt, like that's a really good sign of a good chiropractor.
Mm-hmm. There have been times where I've had because like in the past, a few years ago, there was a point that I was going to a chiropractor like every 2 weeks. That was before I was like stretching much. After I started doing more stretching more often, I didn't go nearly as much, but there's a guy I go to, his name's Doctor from our jiu-jitsu school. And it's usually I'll go whenever like, maybe I'll get like a pinched nerve from doing something on the mat and my neck is like, oh, and he'll do some stuff in the neck and it'll relieve some pressure for that time. But it's at those times that I usually go now. I don't find the need to go as much as I did in the past just because I do stuff often, so I do think it can be beneficial. I just think that like in your situation, when they do the same, because there is like a protocol that they go through on people, but when they do that same thing on everybody, then yeah.
And they sometimes only spend a couple minutes with you, right? Mm-hmm. And they, snap you here and there and they're like, yeah, we took an x-ray or whatever it is they do, and then they give you like some shitty news about what they think's going on with your spine or whatever. Like I've had horrible interactions with some chiropractors, but also really great ones as well. But every time that I've had good interaction, they've been able to do quite a bit of other stuff where they could, care for you and stuff. But I would also say I agree with Nsima a lot on this topic in general. You could just take care of yourself, pretty much. You can, stretch and do some of the extra stuff, and it's like you don't really need it. Massage therapy, I'd put all that stuff in the same bracket. It feels good, and I would say like if someone works on you for say 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Sometimes a chiropractor doesn't spend that much time with you, but like a good massage therapist / chiropractor would. That's 20 minutes, 30 minutes away from your phone. It's 20 minutes, 30 minutes where you're, just kind of, sort of by yourself, and it's almost like meditative, So I think for those purposes, it's great. Like for people that are really feel like they're working a lot and they feel like they're lifting and they're, just kind of always just going. I think it's a good like shutdown,
Yeah. And something I just remembered. Dr. Dan's brother, whose name escapes me, and by the way, Smokey's been going to see Dan for like, I don't know, like over a year now. He's been seeing a lot of good results, so he knows what he's doing. Oh. But his brother was explaining to me like the whole, like almost conspiracy behind like way back about how like a lot of people try to make it seem like it was witchcraft and like it was, total BS. So I wish I'm going to have to look that up because like I really want to, learn more about that.
Yeah, it was started by like one guy and, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think like the Palmer Chiropractic School is like the most famous school, and that's where most everybody goes and all that kind of stuff. What's up? Hello. It's going great. Great to have you here on the show today. And, my neck, right here kind of feeling a little something. So I don't know if you can do anything via Zoom or how it works. I felt something. That was pretty good.
That's all chiropractic is, really, if I'm being honest.
Right. So how long have you been in the chiropractic profession for?
5 years, a little over 5 years. Yeah, I graduated 2015. Just down in the Bay Area there, a few hours south of you guys.
And something I recognized with going to many different people over the years for chiropractic work, active release type work, massage therapy, all these different things, it kind of appears that some people are kind of more in tune with healing somebody and almost fixing somebody than somebody else. Do you kind of feel like do you feel like you're pretty in tune with that? When you're feeling the muscles and you've been doing it for a long time now. You feel like you can get pretty in tune with the person and help them pretty good.
It's kind of like, you could reverse the question back to you as like, as a strength coach or someone who's been around athletes for so long. There's definitely like I don't want to say like, I think artistry is maybe a bit of a hippie term, especially when we start dealing with chiros, but there's a certain level of just synthesizing experience and superimposing it with science very quickly that looks like an art to the outsider, right? Like you could look at someone's squat or deadlift or bench, and then through a handful of Russian Soviet manuals and, your own bench press experience and, talking with Louis or Dave or Jesse or whatever, and you can immediately just go, hey, maybe bring your feet back a little bit and try and push towards the rack. And it's just all of a sudden we're hitting PRs like crazy. And someone would look at that as artistry where you're like, well, no, like I've just done it so many times. So yeah, there's a point in which, you just do it enough where if you're aware enough to know that, okay, we're going to try and control as many variables as we can. And then when we start to see these aberrations come out of these controls, they can pop up and be very aware to us, and we know how to deal with them really quickly. And it's just having a little bit more of a flexible thought process, because it's that you don't get that experience obviously coming out of school. So just kind of being able to come up with your own thought process, have your own experience, and start to weight your own personal experience with sort of the empirical research. And then also not to mention like the values of the person you're working with. And if you could put those three together really quickly, then yeah, there is a certain like, artfulness to it that if you're not aware of it and you're just going and punching the clock, then yeah, you'll be more on that other side of the distribution of people who just go in and crack necks and collect paychecks and all that.
And it's also a little bit of guesswork too, right? Because like from my standpoint, when I'm coaching somebody, I'll tell someone to do something and I'm wrong a lot of times, and then I got to go, oh, I kind of gave them the wrong. I told them bring their feet out wider, and now their hips hurt or something. And I got to kind of change my answer. Do you find that yourself? Like you start working on something, and you're like, that's not really where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of what we do, it's diagnosis by exclusion, right? So we fall victim to the fact that we are held to a gold standard of structural assessment a lot, which is basically like X-rays, MRIs, CTs, diagnostic ultrasounds kind of rule the roost. And those are always there in the back pocket. But the goal is to actually get really good at creating a gold standard of functional assessment. So as you create this diagnosis by exclusion, you're going to more likely be near the mark in your primary, secondary, and tertiary potential causes of what it is that's, you know, causing pain or dysfunction or what have you. But yeah, you're always guessing. But it's just, you know, the educated guess, as it were, comes with sort of that artful expression of the science and the experience. So it can be tough, because I think in people, especially when you're dealing with rehabilitation or pain or anything like that, especially in athletes, they're looking for certainty. Right? They're looking for the absolute surefire silver bullet, like, you know, this is how I feed my kids. This is how I'm gonna, you know, I can't do this forever. I need to make sure I can get back to my big contracts or whatever. So they're looking for certainty, and I think just like anything, right? The better you become at it, and that Dunning-Kruger sort of overlap, you go, oh shit, I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. And then you're dealing with like a high level athlete and who makes millions of dollars, and like, yo, you sure about this? And you're like, no, I'm not, but YOLO, let's do it. So it's tough. And the people who honestly, I think, who are successful early in like a business end are people that just are blindly confident, and on the further left of the distribution of that Dunning-Kruger effect, that you have no idea how dumb you are, but you can stand up on the tallest hill and be like, this is the prophet, the word of God reigns upon you, the commandments of rehabilitation. You're sitting there just going, can someone get this guy off this hill, please? But the hard part is Instagram gives everyone the hill, and there's just sermons on all these mounts everywhere, every day. So it's difficult to navigate for sure, because you become only increasingly more uncertain of yourself as you sort of look at more and more problems. I have no idea what I'm doing.
As we demonstrated right off the bat, you can't do chiropractic, you know, via Zoom. So how has your 2020 been? Has it been shit, or has it been good?
No, it's been, I mean, I don't practice in the conventional sense anymore, man. Like I have maybe a half dozen, maybe like 10 athletes right now that I work with, a couple weeks at a time, NFL, NHL guys. And then I work a lot online in the education space, trying to relay some of this context to trainers and coaches and therapists. So it's hard to sit here and say that my life has been unaffected, but more or less unaffected. I don't do the 9-to-5 office stuff anymore. So 2020 has just been similar to 2019 to a certain degree, if I'm being honest.
Just some small pivots, and everything's pretty good.
Yeah, we were set up online on the education side of things before COVID. Obviously, like I used to teach a lot of seminars face to face. It was pretty much all I did for 2 years, was just travel around and teach. Obviously, that kind of took a back seat. But from a business standpoint, seminars, if anyone's ever done them, I mean, look, I'm talking to you here. They should be paid lead acquisition. So, you know, the margins aren't great from a business perspective. They're a lot of fun. I enjoy them, but we had the online education stuff up for time before that. So it was really, I think the one, like, you know, the P word is so popular this year. The one pivot we had to do was just move one of our semesters a week ahead. And that was just like, whew, dodged a bullet there.
What made you want to become a chiropractor? Because you said you got your doctorate in chiropractic in 2015, right?
Right.
What spurred you towards like wanting to become a chiropractor versus anything else?
I wanted to wear cutoffs to work, and I realized I couldn't do that as a history professor. I started studying history and political science in my undergrad, and I used to train in the off season for hockey. I was a fairly competitive hockey player growing up in Canada, and it got to a point where I wanted to, you know, train more than I wanted to play hockey, and then it got to the point where I wanted to train more than I wanted to be in school. And I was like, oh, mom's gonna be pissed if I just, like, you know, if I turn into the Venice Beach king of like, if I can out bench him, out squat him, it's like Louise is gonna not be thrilled. So like, all right, how can I kind of get paid and still be in the gym? And I was a personal trainer at the time. It was like, personal training, wages, blah, 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 blah. And like one of my buddy's clients was a chiro. And I'm like looking at his business model, I was like, it's very similar, like time for money. He drives a Range Rover. I fucking like Range Rover. So like, hey, what do you do for? And so that was like the impetus was like, okay, I want to work in the gym. I want to kind of stay active. I want to help people in a similar fashion, but I don't want to live with Mike and Louise shallow forever. So I put those into a Google search field, and out came like, I don't know, chiropractor. And that kind of spurred the change. transitioned from history to kinesiology, and the rest is kind of history.
And did that change the way you look at like your training as an athlete, like learning all the things you did in chiropractor school? Because like your focus is biomechanics and you share a lot of information on Instagram, YouTube, everywhere about human biomechanics. Was that mainly from what you learned there and then applying it to training? Or was there other things that obviously played a role in terms of that?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because I think if it was purely the school, you could march any of the 50 other kids that graduated in my year across fitness podcasts, and they'd all tell you the same thing. Like, I'm super lucky. I mean, Mark, you guys are up the road. I got to spend so much time with Jesse at Dublin CSA. I worked under Dan at Boss. Got to know Ed Cohn through powerlifting, and Chad Wesley Smith, and then Dave Tate and Louie. And so you just get this like repository of information, and you also get to spend 4 years in a cadaver lab with a dead body and a knife. And it's like, well, this is a little bit interesting. So it definitely, one hand kind of fed the other. And I think both of which kind of fed my like curiosity around training, which I think that would be like the biggest driving factor, was just like, like you look at an anatomy textbook and you're like, oh, it inserts here and this is blue and this is red. And then, Dave comes in who had a social security and a wife yesterday, and you cut his face off and you're like, oh shit. This is not like a textbook at all. Like, dude, I literally could not eat pulled pork for the first 6 months because you just open up his dead body, and like every time I would see pulled pork, I would smell formaldehyde. Oh God! I was like, oh fuck, this is so. Yeah, it definitely helped. But I would say more helpful in like the biomechanics side was just getting to be around people who just have done it so well for so long and had like these evolved and adapted thought processes when it comes to training. And then 5% of this is just like, hey, remember when you cut open that dead body and you saw this, or you remember when you studied for 40 hours for that one board exam and you kind of learned about this thing in the hip. But so much of it on the applied side is just being around people who've done it so well.
Why are people so skeptical of chiropractic? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Because they should be. They absolutely it's a terrible business model. That's why I don't do it anymore. It's like, this guy's, if he's good, you pay him nothing because he gets you better in one go. And if he's terrible, he makes bank and has a boat and like a Tesla. So it's just, yeah, it's backwards. Like it's, I don't want to say it's unregulated, but relatively speaking, unregulated. Next to maybe like a more conventional Western medical physician, like a medical doctor.
So from a financial standpoint, you can go in there and just absolutely crush it as a chiropractor. If you wanted to do that and you wanted to just say, hey, you got to see me, 3 times a week for the next several months. And you could string these people along and get x-rays and MRIs and really just load up your bank account kind of thing.
Oh, workers' comp, you could get into PI cases. You could be, like, chiropractic offers you the potential to be the biggest piece of shit on the planet. Like, no, it's terrible, man, because, I have to be on the other. I could almost consult for people like, hey, this guy sent me this treatment plan. What do you think? I'm like, let me stop you right there. I don't need to see it. He sent you a treatment plan? What is this, to finance his boat? Like, get out of here with this nonsense. So I think people are rightfully so to be skeptical because chiropractors as the whole on a profession have not earned the right to not be skeptical of them, right? Physical therapists are a little bit more tightly controlled as they work in a more synergistic relationship with conventional medicine, which obviously has their problems, but at least the regulation keeps the business antics in check, right? So it's hard for me. Like, it's a little different here in Canada, but when I was in the States, like, I used to live in Mountain View, which is over the hill from Santa Cruz. I was like, so they're trying to sell me on this crystals package. I was like, for fuck's sakes, man. Like, this is what I'm up against. And it's so hard to discern.
Those don't work.
Right? Like, no, all the amethyst in the world, unless you, never mind. Like, maybe freebase it or smoke it like somewhere. But like, so it's hard because people just see the title and they don't think to discern or like contextualize that there's a difference between one or the other. And, it's basically whatever your motivation is. You want to make money. It's like, dude, you can make, and I know guys in the Bay Area when I was there that were just pulling racks, like millions of dollars a year. And it's like, they honestly probably helped 0 people.
So if somebody walks into a chiropractor's office and they get hit with the like the subscription base, where it's like, hey, like this is gonna help, but if you pay all up front right now, we're really gonna be able to help you. Is that like the ultimate red flag?
So it's funny. I did a YouTube video on this like way back in the day, and I actually got like death threats. One of them was like this old lady from Berkeley. I was like, "Bring it on, bitch! I'll give you my home address. Come at me," as they say. So I would say big, and this is literally, I don't think it's changed since I made the video like 5 years ago. It's sadly enough my most viewed video, which is kind of like, oh, for fuck's sakes, what am I doing here? Any Groupon, any first free, anything like that, that's the old bait and switch, right? That's just, hey, we're just here to spread the good word. It's like, listen, Jehovah's, like, get the fuck off my fucking you don't need this shit. You're walking right into it. Second would be, treatment plans, subscriptions. That's a big red flag. And third would be x-rays. And I'm going to put an asterisk next to that, because like if you get in a car accident, sure, advanced imaging might be something you want to look into out of the gate, right? Like if you just think you have whiplash or you think you're having a stroke, it's like, okay, go get an MRI, not necessarily an X-ray. But if you come in with just, and if you're under a certain age category, like if you're over the age of 55 or 60, there are different things where imaging might be necessitated. So I don't want to, dispense with that context. But if you're just a young lifter, right, and your back kind of hurts, you did Shako or Small Love or some Bulgarian shit, and you've just been training like, 8 days a week for 6 weeks a month for 14 months out of the year. It's like, all right, if a guy goes, hey, x-ray first, it's like, no, because it's kind of what I talked about earlier, right? Like the gold standard of structural assessment. It's like, that just tells me this guy has no aptitude for creating a gold standard of functional assessment, right? Like I'm looking at 3 guys here that guaranteed have some level of disc herniation without a fucking doubt. But it doesn't matter because we all function really well. We all move really well. We all know how to train. We all know how to lift, so we can operate without pain. This idea, this antiquated notion that like the structure dictates our function is going to tell us how we're in pain is so just absurd, right? Like it's just so old school. And so those would be my big things, like Groupon, sales, certificates, first free, whatever, treatment plans, and then like advanced imaging out of the gate. If you go to see a chiropractor and they drop one of those on you, put your hand over your wallet, don't turn backwards, keep your eye on the entire time, and just slowly back out of the office.
So you worked with a lot of different types of athletes, NBA, NHL, rugby players, football players, all different kinds of people. What's the most challenging sport that you had to deal with? Like, and what would be the reason on why it's maybe more challenging?
Hockey's tough. Anytime we start to deal with heavy rotational athletes, which is a lot of the time the case, tennis is really difficult just because of the systems, right? Like the energy systems that you need to be proficient across, like, Rafa and Federer are going 5, almost 6 hours at Wimbledon. It's like, that's a different type of, that's quadruple overtime in the NHL. Like you don't have to prepare for that really. It's like, Zdeno Chara might drink a Coca-Cola after the second overtime. It's like, yeah, do whatever you want, man. There's no rules for this. Tennis is difficult. Any special teams football player. So one of my guys is a kicker in the NFL. That's a very special shape and a very just different way to train. Like there's 5 or 6 different real shapes in football, but I would say the kicker was tough. Continues to be tough. Tennis players, the change in direction, the rapid rotation, the bilateral rotation. Like a pitcher is going to throw right-handed, right over right hip, or right shoulder over left hip, where the backhand forehand, like being able to manage through the transverse plane in different levels of hip rotation. Tennis players, I maybe if I had to just pick one, I would say tennis players, but there's special cases. Like, kickers in football are tough. Hockey players with their hips and how asymmetrical and how different being on skates is to any other sort of field sport. Hockey players have like a laundry list of like hip and femoral acetabular issues. But yeah, I would say somewhere in there exists a very difficult, not difficult. It's just, if you go an O lineman, for example, is probably an easier person to train. right? Like you're going to, each play lasts 5 to 6 seconds. You're going to have this level of capacity, power and strength. It's very easy to anticipate the shape and system of that particular athlete. Whereas as those two defining criteria become more broad, your programming becomes a little bit more abstract, a little bit more difficult.
I like the way you're using that word shape. What's the definition of it for you?
Well, yeah. So I mean, and this is where strength coaching gets really, it gets lost, because like a shape would just be, what kind of positions are we finding ourselves on the field, right? Or, you know what, UFC, mixed martial arts. There you go. That's the most difficult one to program for. That's a fucking nightmare. That takes the cake over anyone else that I've ever programmed for. So anyone who does combat sports is infinitely harder to program for than any other athlete.
And what makes
shapes would be
what makes that so?
The sympathetic drive, right? Like you're trying to deal with muscle tone on someone who, like, if I play hockey, or I deal with a hockey player, right? Like, especially the way the game's played now, it's very much speed. Like if I go into the corner of like the offensive zone, the other guy's going in, he's going for the puck. If I go into a cage with another guy who was 180 pounds 2 days ago, then he was 150 pounds, now he's 180 pounds again, he's not going for the puck. He's going for the heart in my chest, right? That totally changes the sympathetic drive, your cerebellar function, your interpretation of like muscular tone. So that's just a nightmare, especially like going into and coming out of like a fight. You have an athlete that comes in like the day after a fight. I'm not touching you for like a week. Go sit in a float tank, turn the lights off, give me your cell phone. Like we had no idea what we're dealing with here. But yeah, shape would just be like, what kind of position do they find themselves in the field? But I think one of the issues that I see in modern day strength and conditioning is we try and too closely emulate those shapes in the weight room, right? Like it's like, if we're getting in those shapes on the field and we're practicing during the season or during the off season, how do I actually find complementary shapes in the gym? Right? How can I maybe offset that shape? So like, I see a lot of, and it makes sense if I'm to do an Instagram post and I do something that looks like something on the field, an athlete's gonna be like, oh, that's gonna make me better at doing this. Like, throwing weighted baseballs, or, hooking half of the Titleist up to the fucking cable stack and just ripping like 30-pound whatever. It's just, that, if anything, that's probably going to diminish the speed, change your mechanics, right? So shapes, to me, strength and conditioning comes down to shapes and systems. What energy systems are we in? Where do we need to like sort of buffer the outer borders of other energy systems? What shapes are we in, and how do we reverse those shapes if necessary, or reinforce those shapes if necessary in the gym?
So is that kind of like what Prescript is in terms of like the program that you build for coaches, or that I think that's like it's an educational program. Is that kind of what that helps you with? Is it for coaches that are looking at a lot of different sports, or is it for coaches that are focusing on strength training athletes? How does that tie in?
Right. So the level 1 course is like kind of our flagship. That's really based more around like functional anatomy and applied biomechanics. So that's kind of setting the foundational framework in which to think about these higher level thought processes in programming and execution for sports. So level 2 is more sport specific, and we have curriculum in the works for actual strength training methodologies spinning off into different sports. Hockey, for example, combat sports, field sports, things like that. But yeah, Prescript is definitely more on the educational side. And then we have weightlifting and powerlifting courses that sort of take these core principles of functional anatomy and biomechanics and go, okay, how do we cross apply this into sagittal sports like powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, barbell sports like that, and then that the central core tenets of applied biomechanics and functional anatomy. How do we then spin off from that and then create more resilient athletes across different sports? So that's kind of how our curriculum is divided up.
What do you see that separates out the best athletes from even just your average person? This kind of stuff fascinates me. Like we do see people with great work ethic, and we see a lot of that. But like from a physical standpoint, a lot of times, an athlete might be 6'8", 250, like LeBron James, right? And there's really not much you can do about that. And obviously LeBron James works very hard on top of being a specimen. But what kind of like freaks do you run into, and what's like kind of what are some of the things that you notice that's a big difference that stands out amongst the kind of cream of the crop?
Yeah, I want to give credit to Andy O'Brien for this. Andy's Sidney Crosby, amongst a handful, he works with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but he's like the premier strength coach in the NHL. And speaking with him, I've kind of changed my thought process, and it really comes back to like control. Right, like being able, most great athletes, there's a handful of outliers, but most like the LeBrons, the Jordans, the Gretzkys, the Crosbys, the Mannings, the Favres, the Bradys. It's about control. So it's about being able to, like, if you look at most of those guys' resting heart rate during a game, it's likely 20 to 40 beats lower than the rest of the people on the field. So their ability to control their parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, obviously being in a more parasympathetic flux, that allows you not only in the moment to be more efficient with your resources during the actual competition, it allows you to recover better when you're training, which allows you to train more and build a greater capacity, right? So I really think, not to go straight down to the central governor theory, but I think large in part is parasympathetic control. And some people just do it innately, right? Some people are just really good at being a little bit more mellowed out, for lack of a better term. And some people know it's something that they need to work on, and they focus it as a part of their training. Like, I don't know what LeBron spends. It's something to the tune of like $2 million a year on his like physical support staff. And I would imagine the majority of the implementation that's getting spent on is inhibitory parasympathetic, right? Like the days of just, and that's the crazy thing with powerlifting, right? Like I've never once seen like nose torque on the bench anywhere, but yet, just the red ammonia caps behind the ears. Like, wouldn't that be hilarious just to see, I don't know, who's a good pitcher? The kid, like Bumgardner on the mound. Hold on, guys. Here comes 109. Like,
right.
It's the ability to go or stay low when everyone else is high, right? Like, it's almost this: if your enemy's close, make them think you're far. If you're far, think they're close. Like, it's the art of war, man. Like, it's really an interesting subset. Like, you said LeBron is a specimen. I would argue, and I've never seen his like HRV data or anything like that, but I would say what makes him a specimen is if you take another guy who's 6'8", 280, and you run him up and down the court, the energy and the amount of stress that person, the neurochemistry of a person, anyone else who does that is going to be vastly different than his. So his ability to stay, cool under pressure, like those clutch guys, those career guys, those legacy guys, it really comes down to that control.
Do you think it's like I got this type of situation? Like I'm good enough for this? Like it's maybe a belief system, like Anderson Silva kind of comes to mind, like when he was back, pulling off like tricks that you'd see like in the Matrix, and he was just knocking people out. And it seemed like he had an ability to slow everything else down. I've heard Jordan talk about, like when he was young, he talked about being like a puppet master and how he controlled everything on the court. He controlled the ball, which controlled the guy who was guarding him. Like, it was crazy hearing him talk about it. And he could make someone fall down if he wanted to, with the way that he could dribble, the skill level. So I'd imagine that a big part of it is A, probably, the skill set that they have, and B, having some of that physicality, like a Shaquille O'Neal, it probably makes you just feel more comfortable, and then therefore maybe relaxes you a little bit.
I would imagine it would have to be like a compounding effect. And there's a domino that falls first that I think you absolutely, like, if you've ever read like Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, or where it's like, the kid who's 6'8", like I grew up with a kid who's 6'8", he was 15 years old and he was 6'8".
Jesus. He
got the best coaches. Oh, he's a freak. He broke my hand with a slap shot in the warm-up of a game when I was 16 years old, and I was wearing a blocker.
Jesus.
Like, this kid was ripping 100 miles an hour as like a 16-year-old kid. Yeah, but he got the best coaches. He played on the best teams. So for him, a lot of it just came from his physicality, right? So someone might have the natural instinct to stay control. He was a space cadet. Like, this kid would drop someone said something about his sister, he would kick their ass, and not in control at all. But he got enough opportunities that he actually became good, and that built the confidence that he then could go like, okay, look, if I needed to, like, if I can manipulate and control these variables. So I think the change in that process is whatever the impetus is, right? I think some people have the control that allows them to build the confidence, and then that confidence then further begets the control, and then they're just sitting there playing a different game, right? Like Silva's such a great example. I still remember when he came out to that. What was that? I think it was a DMX version of Ain't No Sunshine. This guy doesn't speak a word of English, and he's just kind of sitting there like singing along. I'm like, that is terrifying. I literally like stood up and went in the other room and peeked around the corner to see if he was still walking out. But it's like, because he's just like Tyson, right? Like Tyson, if you've ever watched the Spike Lee thing, and I think he said it on numerous occasions, was like, you could tell before they ring the bell when the guy breaks eye contact that he's already won, right? And it's that, and whatever it was with Tyson, it may have been a physicality thing. With Silva, it may have been a control thing, but all of these things culminate to a point where they're literally just playing another game.
When you started talking about that control aspect, it kind of piqued my ears because, well, we had Phil DeRue on here before, and then Patrick McEwen too, and they were both talking about the benefits of that. And I think for myself, maybe 2.5 years ago is when I read The Oxygen Advantage, maybe 3 years ago or something like that. And when I started focusing on nasal breathing as far as like the martial art that I do, which is jujitsu, it literally just changed over time how I was on the mat. I try to stay calm before that. I would always attempt to, but it's like I was naturally able to just continually be calm throughout everything that I do while training. So my question to you is, how do you maybe apply that to athletes? Because I think this year, especially, breathing's become a very, very hot topic. Like there's, I think, James Nestor's book or whatever, and he was on Rogan, and now people are even talking about it more. How do you approach that with athletes? Is it as important as people are touting it to be, or is it like there's importance there, but there's also another way to, I guess, elevate the parasympathetic tone that you're talking about?
So for me, in reading Nestor and reading Patrick McEwen and Oxygen Advantage and knowing Phil, I think, yes, absolutely. It is the performance driver, not the only one, but it should be up there in your top 2, top 3 considerations. Mm-hmm. But my biggest thing with breathing that these books don't necessarily cover on is actually more the biomechanics than the biochemistry, right? Like, because function, so at the rib cage and at the pelvis, structure and function are this transparency that they're one and the same, where the shoulder and the hip, not so much, right? Like if I can't look at your shoulder, and I mean, maybe I could, because I've seen enough of them, be like, I bet you dislocated that shoulder and maybe you have a tear in your bicep or tear in your pec. I just know what I'm looking for. But I could teach a 4-year-old to look at a rib cage and be like, okay, that person's inefficient in the way they're breathing. And that position in which they're breathing and actually makes them biomechanically inefficient, not just biochemically inefficient, right? The inability to operate without carbon dioxide is one thing. But, there are certain sports where that energy system, albeit still benefited peripherally from an improvement of like aerobic capacity, but the shape of being in a position that allows you to reach those levels of capacity biochemically actually improves drastically your efficiency biomechanically, right? So I look at the rib cage and pelvis and their implications on breathing from a biomechanical standpoint, and that's really the selling. And honestly, man, like it depends on who I need to sell it to. Right? Like if I got some meathead athlete that doesn't give a baker's fuck about a Bolt score or an HRV that just wants to run through walls, I need to make a biomechanical argument that organizing his rib cage in this fashion will make him stronger, will make him faster, will make him bigger, right? Shout out Chris on that one. Sorry. I feel like I totally ripped off the title on that. So we'll just show him a bit of love there. But so to me, it's understanding both sides. And I think the conversation that's missed in the current narrative, right? Like maybe 4 years ago, it was gut health and everyone was fucking eating kimchi and shit. And, then sleep kind of worked its way in there a little bit too, right? Like, well, what's his name came out with the Why We Sleep book. And now all of a sudden it's breathing, which is great. And all of it matters. But I think the breathing has to subdivide its conversation away from the biochemical and towards the biomechanical. And that's, to me, where I look at it and I consider it in my own training and how the considerations of that has affected my training and the training of my athletes you end up getting the same result, the 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You're going to get the biochemical if you can fix the biomechanical, because there's a transparency of the structure and function of the rib cage and the pelvis, right? If you're in an extension posture, I know that your diaphragm inserts like roughly around the T10 thoracic vertebra. If you're walking in like, what's up, bro? It's like, dude, how can you possibly, that diaphragm can't flatten and extend because your ribs are pulled up, your thoracic spine is extended. Now all of a sudden, I know you have to use your accessory muscles of breathing, your strap muscles of your neck to start to create some level of negative pressure, right? So I know your biochemistry is off and I know your biomechanics are off. So the lens in which I look through it as doesn't really matter. But for me, with like the sports or the people who gravitate towards me as a strength coach, that's my usual talking point is more to the actual biomechanical advantages of fixing your breathing rather than the biochemical.
So a lot of efficiency in general is just going to come from the way that we move. You know, if you think about, you mentioned Ed Cohn a little bit earlier, and when you seen Ed Cohn's career, or if you checked it out before, you know, like he basically just got stronger almost every single time he competed, which is really, really rare. But if somebody can master a movement and they can continue to get better at that movement and they can figure out ways of being more efficient at that movement, they can continually make progress until something happens where all of a sudden they're not as efficient as they were before, or they cut a corner somewhere and then they potentially end up with like an injury or something like that. But I think that's what makes a lot of these conversations so difficult. You know, if I say, hey, you know, I want you to do 5 sets of 5 on a deadlift, with 70% of your max or whatever the weight is, somebody might, their 70% or the weight that they chose for that particular day, all 25 reps might be kind of difficult, and they might be, lifting, and they might look like a fishing pole the whole time. And they might be really, severely rounded over throughout the entire movement. Whereas what I was trying to convey and saying, hey, use about 70% was, I would love to see these be picture perfect. I would love for maybe rep 25 on the last rep of the last set. Maybe you're starting to get fatigued a little bit, and maybe you have a small breakdown in your technique or your form. But the efficiency, I think, really comes through, really learning how to move and learning that movement properly. And it's just something that I just don't see people, they don't practice it enough unless they have a coach, which is great if somebody has a coach. But I think more lifters could spend time. It doesn't matter the exercise. Spend time, learning the exercise. I also think on the flip side of that, have a little fun here and there. And if you want to go a little heavier, you want to use some body English here and there, I think that's totally fine. But I do think you have to put a percentage devoted to practicing. And we see a lot of practicing in sports where people do drills for jiu-jitsu, they do drills for wrestling, they do drills for basketball, they do drills for everything. But when it comes to lifting, a lot of times people aren't practicing their drills. And when it comes to something like breathing, that would be something that you'd be like, yeah, I know how to breathe. Like, kidding me? Like, what's this coach talking about? Was he an idiot? Like, how could I not know how to breathe? But I love the way that you were putting it, because it wasn't necessarily about how someone doesn't know how to breathe. It's just that they're breathing inefficiently, and they're probably wasting energy in areas that they're not even aware of.
Yeah, powerlifters are great, aren't they? Like, blessed. Like, how many of these guys have sleep apnea at 220? It's like, oh yeah, no, but you do you, homie. You breathe on there. You have fucking, I can hear you from across the room. You sound like a French bulldog. But it's, to me, honestly, it's the abdication of responsibility that comes with an adherence to a guided thought process, a system, some bullshit 3-letter acronym that goes, this is how you train and this is how we quantify. It's like, look, I'm not in the business of quantification. I'm in the business of qualification. I think that there's a quality to the service I provide, and I expect a yield of quality from the people that I provide it to, right? And so, because I take responsibility and ownership over, like, look, if this goes wrong, it's on me, right? If I had a guy tear a hamstring in the first week at camp, right, I can't be like, well, we hit our 5x5 at 75%. It's like there's a quality to his movement that I wasn't aware of, I wasn't looking for, right? But people that are trying to get into this and they don't respect like the quality of movement, even for something as, I don't want to diminish it, but compared to like a multiplanar athlete, something as simple as a squat can be done in very, like watching Yuri Belkin, right? Like you just watch Yuri pull or Jamal pull, and you're like, what's going on here? Like there's a timing, there's an artfulness to what they're doing that, and Jamal's program is actually really interesting to me because of the way he's one of the stronger lifters that uses an RPE based system. Although I think intuitively at a certain point, Yuri would have to do something similar just to be able to manage the kind of loads that he manages. But I think a large in part to like the breakdown in quality is just the abdication of responsibility that comes with creating systems that allow you to just purely track progress through the lens of quantification. Like, I'm not here to crunch numbers, man. Like, you're here to win championships. Like, that's really what you're after when I think you work to a certain level or work with a certain athlete. And those athletes will push you to come up with answers more so than, I don't know, 5x5 at 75%, right? Like there's an intent with when you said that, right? The intent was like, look, I want to see practice of skill across these repetitions. And I want to see a taxing of the underlying system in which we're trying to improve through that skill, that squat as a conduit to that system that we're trying to improve. It's just, I don't know if people don't know their history. People don't watch Ed lift. People don't watch, like the Hatfields or the Cones or, insert any person who's done it in the past, who's done it really well, the Ben Johnsons, right? The Donovan Baileys. And I think a lot of it starts in that and the appreciation of the acquisition of the skill of whatever it is you're trying to improve upon.
I don't want to like focus too much on this, but I know that there's probably a lot of listeners that are in that boat. You mentioned the 220 powerlifter that's using a sleep apnea machine. And I know a lot of powerlifters that are like that. Like they have so much dysfunction there that they're recommended to use a sleep apnea machine. Now I know you can't just plaster a Band-Aid on that individual and say, you need to do this, this, and this to get rid of that. But for the individuals that probably over time, they could get rid of that. They could, better things in terms of maybe the way they breathe or et cetera. What are some ways that you'd go about that to maybe get an individual off of using that machine at night? Because that would be ideal, probably.
Yes. So for me, I look at human function as how we operate when we walk and breathe. I think that's a pretty good, it's not shake weights, it's not suspension trainers, it's not Bosu balls. It's those two adaptations I think are furthest along evolutionarily. You don't do those well, you don't, you're not going to make it across the Serengeti. You're going to get eaten before you eat, kind of thing. So I think those two adaptations are the main drivers of human function. So from a breathing standpoint, a lot of it comes down to, like, especially with, let's stick with the example of the powerlifter. How is it that the muscles that we train disproportionately to powerlift affect the resting state and position of our rib cage, which will then create this transparency of function to the lungs and diaphragm beneath it, right? So for me, a lot of powerlifters present almost like this. Like if they were to lie flat on, and you watch it when they walk, they have a really hard time rotating and working through the transverse plane because they just have this stack of pancakes.
I find all this very insulting, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
I heard stack of pancakes.
So there's an ovoid adaptation to the rib cage, and this hand gesture is obviously exaggerating it for the sake of example. So that would be as if I was like laying flat on my back like this, and we took my rib cage out and faced it the same way. I would be like squished. Because you're holding hundreds of pounds. What do you think is going to happen to your rib cage? And what do your pecs do to your rib cage? What do your rhomboids and your traps do to your rib cage? They just pull and just take this thing that would be more circular and they kind of pancake it out. But we have muscles on the side that would be able to kind of compress this inward, right? And then create a more fluid dynamic, for our scapula to start to work through this transverse plane, for our rotator cuff to start to work as a function of that scapula's ability to work through this transverse plane. Like our scapulas just move side to side on this little two-dimensional Tron game that we have when we have this pancake rib cage. But now if we were able to create a more circular rib cage by laterally compressing, understanding how the serratus and external oblique work in the matter of, in the inhalation and exhalation through the process of ventilation or how we breathe, and how that lateral compression can help offset this A to P compression. And now all of a sudden, when my scapulas move, they're not just purely moving across this Paper Mario sliding edge interface. There's a dimensionality across what's called an instantaneous axis of rotation, as these scapulas can now move through both like rise and run, right? Like we can start to rotate through all three planes. And guess what's now going to be able to function better? right? Our rotator cuff, our subscapularis, our teres minor, our infraspinatus, our rhomboids, we actually start to create space. Like when we're at rib cages like this and we're flat because all we do is bench and work through the sagittal plane, our rhomboids are actually inhibiting, or our scapula are actually inhibiting us from breathing properly. We need to, contrary to popular belief, actually be able to create space between our rib cage for that air to go, right? Because when we're walking around like this, the air is going here and not back there, right? So creating that posterior expansion of the air is now going to help double down in our position in creating a more circular rib cage, which then will allow peripheral function to be expressed through the scapula and the supporting musculature. So any drills that will, to kind of double back and hopefully give an answer to your question, exercises that will either laterally compress the rib cage, so things where you integrate like the function of the serratus, and the serratus has upper and lower fibers. The upper fibers, I would think of exercises like dips, like doing dips through full range if you have the lats and the subscap to support the anterior translation of the humerus in which to do so. Pullover, basically we build capacity to laterally compress our rib cage, working towards the overhead and working low into extension. So farmers carries into dips, overhead press into pull-ups, and then to a more remedial sense, like side planks or unilaterally loaded farmers carries to laterally compress a rib cage more. So basically, we want to take ourselves and squish in from the side and start to breathe into the back, right? So pronated grip rows, where I'm going to really exaggerate my scapular position. Most people are like, oh, why is he rounding his back? Why is he rounding his back? Because he's teaching his air to start to unpancake his fucking rib cage. I got a bench right over my sternum. I can't breathe here. Tuck my pelvis underneath. My obliques laterally compress my lower rib cage. And then as I'm reaching and I'm breathing in through my nose, this air has nowhere to go but into the back, right? Like if you ever squished a Gatorade bottle and you want to like blow it up again, you just go, and then all the little dents in it come out. That's kind of how we need to manipulate our breath to expand our rib cage. So I really like overhead work, hyperextension work, and obviously you need to earn the rights through a progression of it. I'm not going to say, Mr. Single Ply Fascia Suit walks into the fucking gym. It's like, all right, let's go. Let's get you on weighted pull-ups. It's like, I can't, what? Like, how? Right? So I think, there's a progression to that, but those are the kind of ends of the progression where we can begin to dose in exercises with laterally compressed, put ourselves in positions or shapes to create that posterior expansion. For most lifters, that's a pretty good heuristic or thought process to operate from.
I like how you gave us lifts to do rather than stretches. That's helpful because a lot of guys, like, as soon as you mention like a stretch or, I know some people like blow up balloons and different things, but you're like, I'm not a fucking clown, so I'm not going to like, put my feet up on the wall and sit there and blow up a balloon and feel my stomach. And it just like a lot of these things, I think they distract you from your training. I'm not saying that they can't be beneficial. I'm sure they have their place, but I always just like to get into training. So I'm appreciative of the fact that you just gave us like exercise. It's like, shit, I can do more farmers walks. Mm-hmm. I can do dips more often. I can do some weighted pull-ups. It makes it easier to integrate that into my training.
Because I think like it's the right, I don't want to say it's the right tool for the right job at the right time. Like my sponge is really good at cleaning pots and pans. It's not good at fending off intruders. A Glock 17 is not good for cleaning pots and pans, but I could probably get someone the fuck out of my place if I pulled it out in the middle of the night. Right. And so I'm glad you brought up like, the very basic blowing up balloons, lying on your back, 90-90 hip lift nonsense. Cause it's like, you need to create a Rosetta Stone between corrective exercise and exercising correctly. Right. I need to drive an adaptation to an athlete. Like your two central nervous systems are so wired for sound. Like you fight guys in house coats. You've deadlifted like however many in squat. Sorry, jujitsu. I just go jive with jujitsu, man. I don't understand it. You kick my ass house coat or not. I don't want to enter into it. But it's like, I need to make a change at the level of your nervous system. Like both of your nervous systems have gone through hell and back. I think for a second, unless you're Franco Columbo blowing up those fucking red water bottles or something, like that's what it would take for me to be like, okay, this stimulus is registering at a nervous system level that, both like really strong powerlifters, the sympathetic drive that comes with combat sports, as mentioned before, is an entirely different animal. So for me to think that, dude, I'm going to have an effect on your nervous system with this nonsense it's just ridiculous, right? And then, like Mark the same, and I very similar. And that was one of the reasons where I had to cross apply these concepts to actual exercising correctly. So what I'm working towards is creating an index of like, okay, we know insertion, we know origin, we know how to kind of set up on machines or with dumbbells. Index the intent of your breathing for every exercise, right? To understand how we can block off certain areas of the rib cage to then expand and compress other areas of the rib cage strategically to take, Pancake Man and actually turn him into a real boy, right? That's kind of that it's an area of interest that I think has gone unexplored because breathing has taken, not that it's a bad thing, but I think as deep a dive as people look into breathing from a biochemical, as mentioned, I think there's really a lot of very immediate impact that we can derive that will cross apply to the biochemical if we focus our efforts in the biomechanical.
Do you have a similar approach for mobility? Because that's another thing that, every lifter knows they need, but we're not going to spend time to stretch because no, I'm going to just go lift weights. But the way you put it, for the rib cage, which is freaking amazing. Do you have anything like that for overall mobility?
Right. So mobility is a tricky one because mobility and flexibility, I think, first need to be clearly defined. So like passive flexibility, passive range of motion is flexibility, active range of motion is mobility, right? So the guy tries to touch his toes and he can, but he sits down and tries to touch his toes and now he can't. It's like, well, this is much more active because gravity is not pulling you towards your toes, right? So I think large in part mobility issues stem from a lack of stability. I usually look at shoulder, hip, and spine, with shoulder and hip being our peripheral hubs of stability. And then we could really, if you want to pull on the string, you could really trace it back to how it is that we walk and breathe. Right? The diaphragm is going to indicate the rib cage structure and function, which will then dictate the peripheral muscular function at the rotator cuff, serratus, lower trap, and so forth. Right? And then how we walk, gait cycle mechanics are going to dictate the pelvic position, broadly speaking, which is then going to tell us how the peripheral musculature of the lateral hip, the adductors, and subsequently quads and hamstrings are going to function. But I would say like very simple things from a range of motion. Obviously, where do we have the potential for greatest mobility? The shoulder, right? Because I didn't fucking rollerblade in here like Goldmember and put my foot up next to my face, right? I don't have that. I don't have that ability. So like in the sense of just in order to train stability to allow us to have good mobility, we have to have good mobility first, which is kind of this weird, like if I can once I get into the overhead position, I'm going to reinforce this, all day, every which way, and twice on Sundays, right? I want to make sure that I have the capacity to express strength and power here, but I need to have the mobility or variability to get into this position first, right? So I think a lot of people just don't understand how it is to dose and when to put in exercise and mobility. Cause like, we've all read the study and I forget that. Like, hey, hold a hamstring stretch for 90 seconds and then do a vertical jump. Like, why? No one would ever do that unless I was wearing a white lab and getting paid some NIH grant to do it, right? Like it was in a white lab coat. And so it was just, that's so silly. If I had to write an equation on how to have a shitty vertical jump and a tear a fucking hamstring, that would be pretty much what the equation looks like, right? So I just think to improve mobility, static stretching is inhibitory, right? It activates Golgi tendon organs. We sort of know this relationship between Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindle reflexes. And then, but to go deeper than that, like, it's so easy to trash foam rolling. It's like, well, no, there's receptors that are made for our cerebellum and our colliculus to map our body. And so we have receptors for heat, right? We have biochemical receptors. You could take a muscle relaxer and you don't feel shit. Right? You don't feel loosey-goosey because it's like as if muscle relaxation to improve mobility is a lock. And we have a ton of different keys that turn these locks that open up our range of motion, right? So biochemical could be one. Heat could be another. Deep pressure, which a foam roller, lacrosse ball, or things like that would work. Vibration. This is a big market now with like Theraguns and Hypervolts and all these, 3/4 inch jigsaw blade DeWalt's, whatever, Makitas, whatever you guys like. They're not breaking anything up. They're just activating a particular receptor within your central or peripheral nervous system, which then acts at the level of central nervous system to regulate tone. So for me, when we look at like the level of the cerebellum, which is really going to be the main driver of movement, as that sort of speaks to the somatosensory cortex and the premotor and the primary motor cortex, it's like proprioception is going to be one of your best tools in improving mobility, right? So being able to elicit a stimulus of instability, which is more of a muscle spindle reflex, in positions of structural instability, right? So I want to try and just get a kettlebell over your head and just go walk. That will probably do more for you than stretching. And look, if you need to stretch your lats in order to do that, go ahead, stretch your lats. If you get here like, oh, my lats are tight, okay, go spend 20 seconds, stretch your lats, or maybe hold that stretch for like 4 full breath cycles so we can have this flux of sympathetic and parasympathetic. Then grab the kettlebell and just go for a walk. We're integrating walking and breathing in an unstable position. I think of it this way, like stability is something I talk about a lot because it exists in the realm of quality that's difficult to quantify. And like we kind of had that little spiel about how important I think quality is in what we do. Think of, you know how they made Smeagol in Lord of the Rings?
Mm-hmm.
You're right. They had the little guy covered in fucking ping pong balls wearing like an Under Armour spandex thing with yeah. So that's kind of how our body maps ourselves in space. And muscle spindles, large in part, are going to allow our central processor to know where we are. Muscle spindles are the ping pong balls on our internal, Under Armour spandex suit, so we can create real-time motion capture of where we are in space, right? So if we don't have these, like if we don't have these ping pong balls all over through our shoulder, hips, and spine, then outward to the knee, elbow, wrist, and ankle, our body gets pretty nervous, right? That's red wire touches the blue wire. Like we cannot map subconsciously this territory. Or that's a signal. That's a large in part where we start to experience pain because our body's like, hey, something's going. We don't have a receiver coming in from ping pong ball number 37 at the right knee. We need something there to tell us where the fuck that knee is. We before we go moving the rest of this around that moves the knee, we got to know where this fucking knee is. Right? And that's a signal that can cause a signal of pain and increase sympathetic tone again through the level of the cerebellum. So, when you think about improving mobility, it's whatever, excuse me. It's the COVID. It's getting me. Whatever mobility drill, foam roller, whatever. All of these things are valid as they all trigger, whether it's Pacinian corpuscles, Meissner's corpuscles, Ruffini ending, and in the case of proprioception, muscle spindles or Golgi tendon organs for static stretching. Each one of these will unlock transiently the range of motion. Once you have this range of motion, you need to elicit that proprioception. Now we need to start to lay down these ping pong balls so our brain, our cerebellum and our colliculus can begin to map internally, subconsciously where we are in space and create this real-time motion capture. So honestly, anything will do on the mobility side, whatever floats your boat, whatever makes you feel better, but more importantly, whatever gets you into these unstable positions of like, hey, I need to in my shoulder to make this like actionable. I want to be able to flex and externally rotate my shoulder with a neutral rib cage. At the pelvis, I want to be able to extend and internally rotate my hip with a neutral pelvis. Right. So if you can do those two things, which are like in a way kind of paradoxical, I'm telling you to flex and externally rotate with a neutral rib cage at the shoulder. And I'm going to tell you to extend and internally rotate the hip with a neutral pelvis. If you can do that and start to spend time with minimizing base support and deviating center of mass, which are the two tenets of stability, you say, get here with a kettlebell over your head, get here in a pull-up. Right? We're going to flex and externally rotate doing both of these exercises and do lunges, do single leg RDLs, do something where your pelvis needs to organize in a way where we can extend and internally rotate the hip. If you aim your mobility sights at allowing you to get into these positions, load these positions, single leg RDL, walking lunges, Bulgarian split squats, kettlebell bottom under press, rope pullover, pull-ups, snatches, whatever. Those exercises delineate things that will improve stability at the end range of joint variability or mobility that you will need. Once you have the stability, then you start to load there and build strength. So mobility drills, 6 one, half dozen the other. I don't give a shit. I don't like foam rolling. Okay, great. Maybe you have more receptors that are wired to receive vibration and the Theragun works way better for you. Maybe you have more of these Pacinian corpuscles that are wired for deep pressure stimulus and the foam roller works better for you, right? We could take a muscle biopsy and find out, but no one's here to become a fucking expert at warming up. Just do whatever the fuck you need to do to get into flex and external rotation, neutral rib cage, extension, internal rotation, and neutral pelvis. And then just load those positions with something relatively unstable and then go do literally anything you want.
What are maybe 2 or 3 things that you've seen that really help athletes with their breathing that's not, overly complicated? Just some simple tips maybe.
Yeah. So the big thing with me is just putting them in the right positions so like, for example, doing mobility drills and core work rather than for duration, but for breath. There's no such thing as static stretching, because as long as you have a pulse, nothing is static. Right. So a side plank for breath is something super helpful. Teach them to organize your pelvis and rib cage. You're laterally compressing using the serratus by driving the elbow into and like, upwardly rotating and protracting while you resist lateral flexion through the external oblique. And I'm not going to prescribe that for, hey, do this for 30 seconds. I'm going to say, hey, do this for 6 breaths, full inhale, full exhale, nasal breathing, because that's still dynamic, right? It's not static. It is a repetition. Because now all of a sudden it's like, look, I'm blocking all this off. Guess what? If you're an athlete and you're an athlete that frankly works with me, you know what your first go-to breathing strategy is? The lower bucket handle, right? We flare our ribs out at the bottom. Now I'm telling you, look, you can't go there. And now I'm telling you to breathe. So your body's now having to find these new strategies in which to breathe, because I'm creating this internal lateral compression. Right. So and even for something as basic as like a mobility drill, say you're trying to improve thoracic extension. Hey, lay over a foam roller for 20 seconds and just get this thoracic extension. But rather than 20 seconds, do that for 6 breaths. Now it's dynamic, right? Because now I'm teaching, like, there's a way it's called your pump handle of the sternum. Some people might actually need to raise this pump handle. But if I'm just sitting there holding my breath like this, going, am I doing it? It's like, well, no, you're not doing anything. Not to mention, like, inhalation and exhalation both have links to sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, right? Exhalation is parasympathetic, like a sigh of relief, right? And sympathetic is like, someone breaks into your place. It's like, like you hear like the door rattle at 3 a.m. You don't go, right? It's not that sigh of relief. So being able to work through any of our mobility or stability drills for repetitions of breath rather than or just arbitrary duration, I think that would probably be something that if there was a takeaway for people to try, something like that, whether it's side plank, even if it's remedial, is like, hey, your side planks, your bird dogs, or like your planks or curl ups, whatever kind of like basic level McGillish big 3 stuff you want to do, rather than doing dynamics through, peripheral perturbation, do it internally, do it at the level of the diaphragm, allow that to be your repetition scheme.
Where are we trying to breathe into? I heard you mention earlier, kind of like breathing through your back. Like, what is your cue? Breathe through the stomach. This is just for I don't know, you're just walking around doing normal stuff, not for lifting necessarily.
Well, I mean, breathing when we're walking around should be low and slow, right? Like, there shouldn't be a huge diaphragmatic excursion, but it's almost like you want to be like, the warrior in the garden. You want to be able to have that diaphragm go all the way up and all the way down. But walking around every day, the one thing I would not promote is belly breathing, for the simple fact that we don't have lungs in our stomach. We have lungs in our rib cage. Like this, God bless powerlifting. Like I love it to pieces for all of its flaws, but one of the things that it needs to cut the shit with is belly breathing. Because it's like, unless you have some sort of implanted 4th lungs, or your left lung has like 7 other lobes that stretch down like in front of your spleen it's like you can't breathe into your stomach. So you might as well just stop trying, right? Because we're compartmentalized. Our diaphragm creates the thoracic versus the inter-abdominal cavity. So it's like, look, let's just worry about filling this guy up with air, and then we'll worry about compressing this guy with musculature. If this guy does his job with the air, we can let all the muscles, the lats and the glutes and the obliques and the core, because we're going to have a broad base. If we can breathe in well, the ceiling of this, the diaphragm is going to make for us, is going to actually set ourselves up so that the musculature is going to be able to stabilize this region of the spine better, because it is segregated, right? That diaphragm separates and I think a lot of people forget that, right? So they just try and make this one big cavity from their trachea to their symphysis of their pelvis. It's like, guys, here's your main floor, here's your attic, here's your basement, right? Like we're separating these floors a little bit. So when you're walking around, low and slow, right? Like the old Lance Armstrong would be on like 4 breaths a minute or something crazy like that. I forget. I mean, I might be hyperbolic there, but the idea of not having that intent, but having the ability to go high, having the ability for that excursion to allow for, that diaphragmatic contraction, relaxation to really have a significant peak and valley, I think is something that's super important. So it's not virtuous to just be only able to have this low and slow. You got to be able to drive it to both ends.
So I'm curious, like if somebody's like Mark mentioned, if somebody's walking around, right? I think the one reason why people like go towards that belly breathing thing is because a lot of people are breathing up here, right? So what can people try to feel for? Do they want to feel for overall expansion in this area when they are breathing, rather than just having their belly come out?
I think the easiest way to cue someone would just be have them organize the rib cage with their pelvis, right? Because most people, they're like this, right? Pelvis is facing this way, rib cage is facing this way. If you can cue this, then the low and slow sorts itself out, right? And that can be difficult, right? Because and here's the thing: when we go and we walk, the reason we have our pelvis do this is because we can't dissociate that extension and internal rotation in a neutral pelvis, like I talked about. We have to get this hip extension by anteriorly tilting the pelvis, right? So if we can improve the mobility, so we can extend the hip by maintaining a posterior tilt in the pelvis, all of a sudden that remedial, mobility drill actually acts as like sort of an associative mechanism to prove the autonomous way in which we walk. So very simply, it's just, hey, your xiphoid process, the symphysis of your pelvic bone, keep those stacked, rib cage stacked over pelvis, however you want to, wings of the ilium under the lateral ribs, however you want to organize that, or cue that. If you keep that, the breathing part sorts itself out. Because again, there's a transparency between the structure and the function. We know if the structure is this way, and the rib cage and pelvis are unique in that sense, because again, the shoulder and the hip can look a certain way, but function entirely different. I know if I'm seeing a rib cage and pelvis organized a certain way, what I'm actually seeing is like the thoracic diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm integrating in that way that I'm seeing on the outward from the position of your rib cage and pelvis.
What about for sleep? We talked a little bit about sleep. You got a couple tips on sleep that have helped, because I know with these high level performers, the recovery is a huge thing. Is there a couple things where you're like, you just recommended something and it ended up working out really well in the case of sleep?
Yeah, sleep, we usually look at like HRV and blood values. So getting a good idea, like longitude, like a single blood draw won't do it for you. But I think balancing the blood is probably one of the ways that we manage sleep and the expectations around sleep. Obviously, like from a quality standpoint, the mechanics kind of fix the biochemical. So we do start to see a shift in blood work that might indicate someone's might have some like biochemical shifts coming on from like an aberrance in breathing patterns. And then we could also consider supplementation. And then there's the external environment, right? It's the habits. It's, are they ripping PS5 till 3 a.m.? It's like, dude, do you need to play NBA 2K, whatever, when you play in the NBA in 2020? Like, do you need more of this? Turn the fucking thing off and go to bed, man. So habits like that. I know some guys have gone down like the CBD route, in which cases, their sporting governing body will allow them to, and that shows some interesting anecdotal promise there. But yeah, sleep it's equal parts sort of habit and science. So blood work, looking at some supplementation, looking at some lifestyle stuff. I've sent guys to shrinks before. Like, look, dude, whatever you see on the ink blot work, whatever test that you see is a little fucked up. You need to go sort your shit out. And that's been an underlying cause. So sleep is a pretty dynamic one when it comes to improvement of the quality of it. But I think at first having a tracking of some quality metrics, whether it's HRV, whether it's blood labs, whether you want to wear a sleep tracker, I think if it's not measured, it's not managed. So it's a little bit of a nebulous one that I don't think we have a full grasp on. But for me personally, with the guys I work with, HRV is going to give me what I think to be a pretty good kind of state, or as far as recovery and resting tone. And then some of the blood work will let me know it's the metabolic. And then there's like these, what we'll call like the psychological side, which could be more behaviors and habits. It could be something where you got to go down a deeper rabbit hole that's outside my scope of practice.
What do you have guys use to track HRV? I know like Whoop does that. Are there any other devices that track it well that people can think about using?
Yeah, it depends on how far down you want to go, right? Like if it's your job, that I like Elite HRV, and that's not a plug. I don't work with them. I don't mind. I like Whoop, and I've worked with them in the past for the sense that it's continuous. You can charge it while it's on. And it works well with most athletic pursuits. Like you're dealing with a combat athlete, you're trying to have them wear a fucking Oura ring. It's like, not really. So I do like continuous data that Whoop and Oura to a certain degree would give you. But for my athletes, it's Elite HRV, which is, it's actually like so it would look similar to like a pulse oximeter that you put on a finger. So you actually have to buy a clip that goes on your finger, and then the app works quite well. I think it's like a 4-minute process every morning, so it's not actually continuous data, but I think they do the best at creating a true HRV measurement rather than because heart rate versus pulse rate is different. So I would make the argument that a lot of the other more conventional fitness wearables, even to what degree Apple and other Garmin devices try to do it, they're probably giving you an HRV based off of your pulse rate, not necessarily your heart rate. So I think Elite probably does the best job right now in tracking HRV as from a wearable perspective.
Nice.
You mentioned earlier, working with some hockey players, and you mentioned playing some hockey yourself. What's the deal with hockey? Why are they allowed to scrape, on the floor there? Why are they allowed to go at it and fight like that? A lot of other sports, as soon as something happens, they break it up and everyone makes a big deal. Why has it become a tradition in hockey to have these brawls?
Well, I mean, now it's better now than it used to be, because the average size of the NHL hockey player when I was growing up versus now is drastically different. It's huge, a speed game now.
They're huge.
Oh, right? God, I remember anyone who's a hockey fan would remember a day that Scott Stevens used to be a defenseman for the New Jersey Devils. And there's this little player for the Anaheim Ducks named Paul Kariya, and he sent Paul Kariya back to the Stone Age. He was about 6'4", 6'5", 260, and on skates you can just get such better. If you know how to use your edges and you're a good skater, you really just end up going northbound on a southbound freeway. So fighting is just it's a self-governing mechanism. So it's almost like that scene in 300 where they got that ogre and they just cut him off the chains. Everyone's, what it is? It's mutually assured destruction. That's what it is. It's a Cold War. It's look, we got this guy from Bulgaria. We don't know. You don't even know if he knows how to skate. And it's we got this kid from fucking Kamloops, Alberta. You hit our guy, we're going to let him off the chain.
Yeah, you pull some shit, we're going to pull some shit.
Right? I think it's the most gangster sport in the world. Don't start no shit, there won't be no shit, right? But no, it's honestly, you grow up in Canada, in the States, and my time living there, it's been basketball, football, baseball. It's almost hard to have all your attention solely focused on these three sports. But in Canada, it's just because we grew up with lacrosse and hockey. And that was it's as much a part of lacrosse as it is hockey. So it's there's an entertainment value to it. There's a culminating tension that usually leads to a fight, which makes it really exciting. But at the end of the day, it's they're 180-pound kids wailing on each other with fucking pillows on their hand. It gets bad. But dude, imagine some of these NFL guys. You would turn into a fucking steel cage match. Right. People would literally die. If you had, two guys who were 280 running 4.5 40s right. with 10% body fat just teeing off at the line of scrimmage, people just be exploding skulls on Fox Thursday Night Football.
I love those old school hockey fights. I've brought it up many times on the show before, but there's Bob Probert and Ty Domi. And they just, it's the coolest thing ever. I think they fought 14 times on the ice. Supposedly they fought I don't know if it's just hearsay or rumor, but supposedly they fought even outside. Just randomly when they saw each other. But they would just tap each other with a stick and be hey, let's go. And they would just go at it every time.
Yeah, I actually grew up in the same town as Bob Probert. So he went his last couple of years before he passed. He trained at the gym I trained at.
He's got to be so famous in that area, right?
Oh, he's a legend. You just see it. His body just tells the story. Eh? You just look at someone's face and man, you've been punched a lot. You just look at his hands. He's got these massive fucking hands. He's God, this is 16-ounce fucking knuckled gloves. Yeah, it was just a different era, man. But even still, it's a part of the sport. I think it'll always be a part of the sport. They're more mindful now in the safety of it, but I think it's a means in which the game is actually safer, right? It's your conceal and carry, right. If I may make an Americanism out of it.
Right.
Makes sense. I have a question, and I'm curious. When you see a lot of athletes, especially strength athletes, come to you in terms of injury, what would be, I guess, the top 2 movements in the gym that you generally see a lot of athletes come to you for? My guess would be the bench press would be one. Maybe I'm wrong, but when I think about it, like I'm wondering, when an athlete's just trying to get bigger, a lot of individuals think I have to bench press, I have to get really, really strong with the bench press, and then it ends up causing issues for them, even though like you're not a powerlifter, like you don't have to focus on that. So what do you see there with athletes, and maybe how can they remedy that?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your first question, I think it would be bench press and squat. I think it's pretty easy by looking at people who deadlift proficiently that if the goal is size and strength, the deadlift doesn't necessarily require the type of size to express the strength, right? Like we see, you see Kaler, Jamal's a big dude. You see Yuri, for example, right? They can pull crazy amounts of weight. And well, Yuri's a bit of an outlier across the board. But like, let's use Kaler, for example. Like Kaler can pull an incredible amount of weight, but doesn't look like a Dan or who would be like a Kevin Oak or someone like that, right? So usually it's bench press and squat. And then if it's not specific to the sport of powerlifting, I rarely utilize it. The bench press for sure. If they're in a position where they're trying to put on muscle or they're trying to have some sort of like, let's say, more conventional athletic pursuit, integration of gait cycle movement and what we call like scapulohumeral rhythm, exercises that are going to promote that, I'm going to dose those more than exercises that break it apart. Low bar squat this is not how our pelvis functions or has evolved to function, right? So, high bar into front squat, there's a little bit more complement to the way the ilium moves or the pelvis moves and the femurs move. So if I'm going into deeper flexion, I want to, at a certain point, adopt a relative neutral or posterior tilt, depending on high front squat, and then, reinforcing unilateral movements. So if someone comes to me and wants bigger legs, it's like, all right, well, we want to have stable hips first, right? So if you can't lunge, if you can't stand on one leg, you're sure shit not going to squat with two, right? And then with building chest and shoulders, it's like, all right, let's get these scapula moving in a way, let's try and build some capacity through the rotator cuff and serratus. Maybe it's a landmine press. Maybe we start with, cable flies or something like that. There is a fundamental difference between challenging muscles and challenging movements, right? But at the end of the day, the stability that precedes the skill to both of those pursuits is going to set the foundation for how high you can go with each of those, right? You don't have a stable pelvis and you're trying to build 40-inch legs. Well, you're not going to put much effective tension through your hamstrings while you're just swinging and kicking your ass with a hamstring curl, right? If you don't have an unstable pelvis and you're trying to squat heavy, well, that pelvis is going to anteriorly tilt and the adductor magnus is going to override the glute max to extend the hip. And your knees are going to knock in, right? So I think regardless of the pursuit, whether it's strength, whether it's size, looking at some of these tenets of like function and stability at like the pelvis, the rib cage, the shoulder, the hip, and the spine, that's usually where I start. It's basically meeting them where they're at, rather than like, all right, man, bird dog. It's like, what the fucking size you pick up and throw people. Why am I going to start you off with like one of these little numbers? You know what I mean? Like, what is this going to do? So it's like finding the most apt, and sometimes you'll miss the mark. But I find it like if you can index and scale your exercises based off of the desired intent, you can start to be like, all right, like I'll look at you, fuck, you're 270, jacked out of your mind. I'm going to maybe put you at this level of anti-rotation drill, this level of, pelvic instability drill, rather than just having a system I follow. I'm like, bird dog side plank curl up, which don't get me wrong. There are people, elderly populations that I work with or super detrained populations that I work with that my thought process would superimpose 1-to-1 with a McGill big 3 for pelvic control, but very rarely outside of those geriatric or very detrained cases will that be the case. Like I'm going to try and meet them where they're at. I'm not like, all right, everyone to the starting line. It's like, what the fuck's the point of that?
Gotcha.
How does it feel nowadays, to be, assisting and helping so many people, through the stuff that you have online, in comparison to, when we looked up your name, a bunch of other stuff popped up, and I think you've talked about it maybe in the past a little bit. So how does it feel to kind of be on the other side of things nowadays, doing such positive work?
Yeah, weird. It's weird. I don't know how to describe it. My life makes no sense. It's a lot of pressure, I think. And so it's something I dedicate a lot of time to. But because I hated school. Anyone who went to grad school with me was like, wait, Jordan, the kid who just fucking played pool through 4 years, like, did he even go to class? So like to be more on like the education side now is not ever what I thought I would do. But I think both, like, with the athletes I work with and kind of with what I do on the education side, both of it just is, this is the level of discomfort and pressure that I can handle right now. Right. Like the clinical stuff got a little bit passive, I don't want to say a little bit boring, but it wasn't a high enough risk. It was just like, you rub some shoulders of a software engineer at Apple. It's like, okay, see ya. It's like, that's not a fulfilling endeavor. So yeah, I don't know how to make any sense of it, man. Like I could ask you the same question and be like, hey man, growing up where you grew up, like, look at your life right now. Does it make any sense? Did you ever think that you'd be sitting in a studio with a giant picture of your own head behind your own giant head wearing the same headphones? Like, is that to scale? You're literally out angling yourself. So I don't know what to make of it. It's cool in the sense that, like, I treated it like it could all be gone tomorrow. So definitely super, like, appreciative that, I'm able to do it. And I talk, and for some reason people listen. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I saw you say something. I think I was like scrolling through your IG, and I saw you say something. I was like, damn, that makes a lot of fucking sense. And I was just wondering where you got it from, or what made you switch your thinking there. You said when you come to making decisions, it's either goes like, you think of two things. Is it going to kill you, or is it going to put you in jail? I think that's what you said, at least. Correct?
Right, yeah.
What, like when did you switch your thinking in terms of decision making to that? Because that makes a lot of sense. Like, a lot of people, when they're trying to make a decision, a lot of times when they don't do it, it's just because they're scared. It's not because it's going to kill them or put them in jail. But when you put it in those two perspectives, it's like, actually, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, last going off when I was in California, I was like sleeping in my car. Like, I was living in my car out of the parking lot of Boss Barbell, and every now and then, when like the last Iron Maiden playing powerlifter left at like 3 a.m, I would go in my office and like sleep for a few hours. So it's like, when you kind of get stripped away of, like, the social media stuff doesn't really matter, because, like, I remember having this point in which it's like, okay, I could walk to the grocery store and have more money because I wouldn't need to pay for gas for my car, and so I could buy more food, but I would expend more calories in the walking to and from, and it would have to take 2 trips because I couldn't carry all the groceries that I could buy with this extra money. And I'm like, dude, I'm like 26 years old and I went to school for a long time, and how the fuck did I end up here? Like, my mom's like, go to school and you'll be fine. I was like, okay, I went to school and I finished. I was like, this is where I get the money now, right? Like, mom, the money is not, I don't have. So I think when you get to the level where it's like, you have to make decisions based off of necessity rather than just like, just some arbitrary pursuit. It's like, that for me was where you were just forced to strip away kind of like what mattered. So in that case, it was like, all right, like, I think of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There was a point where I was very much at the base level of the pyramid, right? Where it's like, I just need to worry about like getting food and kind of like being able to get enough money somehow to get more food. And so you don't really think about, oh man, I hope I'm not wrong on Instagram today. And so it's like, then it's like, wait, does it ever matter if I'm wrong on Instagram? Like, do the YouTube comments really matter? Like, oh, fuck it, I don't give a shit. You let old ladies like throw out death threats at me, I don't give a crap. So yeah, I think it was just being in a position where that would have been a luxury for me to worry about.
Yeah.
That when I got out of that position, I was like, fuck it, just say it. Who cares? Whatever. Like, people have such short attention spans anyways. It doesn't, nothing matters. If I'm not dead or in jail tomorrow, then whatever, it'll be okay.
Out of the, high level performers that you've been around, both in business and in sports, what are some things that separate them out from a mindset perspective?
Oh, good question. I think their attention to detail, like a real like nuanced perspective on things, and a lot of that usually finds them in positions where they laterally think, like in positions where people are like the directors or CEOs, or they're starting 5 or starting 11 or whatever. They seem to have a breadth of interest, even though on the outward they're sort of known for a super specialty. Like, they're the best quarterback, or they're the richest, whatever, they're the director of some company. They seem to be kind of Renaissance people. Like, they can kind of talk about anything, because I think in order to go deep into the thing that they're specialized in, or they've had to go far into a cross-apply concepts to get them to that depth. And it's kind of like this orthogonal way of like tracking thought processes from like going, and I know people that are a mile wide, but an inch deep. Right. But I think a lot of people, the really impressive people, seem to be a mile wide and a mile deep. So I think there's something to be said about, removing yourself from like kind of your focal point in order to gain perspective on what it is that you actually are trying to do. So they do seem to be like very lateral in their thought process, and they know more than just sort of the field in which they're presented as, whether it's a pro athlete or someone in business or someone in music or whatever.
Can you think of anything in particular has happened where you're like, oh, okay, well, that's what makes that guy, when they did something or said something and it kind of like really struck you, and maybe it's something that has stuck with you that you've now incorporated yourself?
Yeah, it's weird. Dan comes to mind because Dan's just insane. And I think he's trying, like, love him to pieces. I think there was a point where I was certain he was just trying to kill himself with a barbell, right? Like, I think it really comes down to the point is, if you love what you do so much, it's that Bukowski quote. It's like, if you love it, let it kill you. Every person who does it, whether they've read a Charles Bukowski quote in the past or not, seems to have that level of dedication to it. And Dan comes to mind because, like, dude, he sent me a picture once of his fucking hamstring, and it was like the Mendy. It was like the Mendy pec.
Yeah, black.
And he sent it to me, and it's like, and the number of text messages I got from him that said, "Hey, does this look torn?" It's just like, I could make a calendar of like just gross pictures of like bruised parts of Dan, and then the little caption, "Hey, does this look torn?" And so just like, the ability to just overcome is usually the biggest expression of something that you see of any top performer, right? Whether it's psychological, physical, like I have athletes who've had like crazy amounts of family trauma or like unexpected deaths or things like that go on in their personal life. But come Sunday, they're there and they're on their game. So I think, their ability to compartmentalize and their ability to overcome is something that whenever I see it, I only ever see it in people who are like top performers in whatever it is they do. Other people, it's an excuse. They let it derail them. They rest on it. They can't compartmentalize it. But the really, like, the best of the best go, okay, I have a job to do. This is my fucking job, and this is what I'm going to do regardless of circumstance.
For you were mentioning earlier how, like, a lot of top performers you talk to or you've seen, they have a lot of width along with a lot of depth. So for you, obviously, as we've talked to you, we can see that your depth lies within the field of biomechanics and working with athletes. But outside of that, like, I think you just mentioned what was it, Bukowski? Charles Bukowski.
Yeah, all his shit's real dark.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
For you, where do you find that your width is? Because it seems that you bring in a lot of like different types of ideas into what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I like stuff other than training. I can only train for so many hours a day and write about it or talk about it for so many hours a day. So, I mean, I don't read fast, but I read a decent amount, just stuff that interests me. I've played guitar since I was a kid. So I always look at that from like a lateral thought process of learning a skill, because like I'm still, for how long I've done it for, like I'm not exceptional at it. So like that helps in just like a sort of a tactile, tangible crossover. So I don't know. It's just, I guess you're always, even when it's almost like the Einstein in the post office thing. It's like whenever you're doing anything remedial away from it, you're sort of freeing up cortical space to actually start to draw these links that you're working on. So like everything I do, I just need to fill the time. There's like a process in learning called interleaving, where it's like, if I were to cram for a test, I could sit there for an hour and just cram away, and then, the next day write the test and hopefully go off of recall and rope learning. But if I really wanted to learn something, it would be an incremental process of like, hey, maybe I study 20 minutes a day every day. And that interleaving period would allow me to retain more. So for me, it's like, I just need to, if the goal is to, whether it's training and we know the importance of recovery, or whether it's academics and we know the importance of like retention and actual learning, I just need to do stuff in the time between to actually derive a benefit of the thing I'm trying to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, and it's complementary now, where it's like when I train, I'm not working, I'm not in front of my computer, I'm not writing, I'm not researching, but I keep a little note on my phone and I have it linked through my iCloud to my computer. And by the time my workout's over, I have a million synthesized thoughts that will then, when I sit down on my computer in like the next morning to work, I now have this note that's like it's spelt wrong because when I hit the thumb thing, there was sweat that fell and the H turned into a T. And I was like, what the fuck did I mean there? I was like, what the hell? So it helps. And then when I'm writing about it, I'm like, oh shit, like obviously it's me, I'm away from the gym, I'm recovering. It's more of a parasympathetic thought process. So I think for me, it just started with training. I was like, okay, I can't train every waking hour of the day. I would like to. Okay, do I sit there twiddling my thumbs? Do I learn how to play hacky sack? Like, what do I do with the other, I don't know, maybe 16, 12 hours a day that I'm awake? And I was like, oh, what's this book here? I don't know. Okay, we'll read whatever on truth and untruth Nietzsche book. And then, so what are you reading over there? I'll read that. And then it just, you're in something so far away that whether it's just the fact that you're distant or the fact that something draws your attention, those little like cortical links start to get made. So it's basically stems from the fact that I just can't train all the time. So I got to do something else with my time. And I found a complementary sort of system that the stuff I do over here helps the thing over here and vice versa.
You need some lighter stuff over there, bro. You're going to drive off a cliff.
Juji gave me a good one, actually. I like this one, Daily Rituals. And it's like really small. And it's just like, have you read this?
I have not, no.
It's really, and it's just like tells like how, because one thing that really frustrates me is like everyone with a podcast talks about their daily rituals of like, I don't know, like they wake up and meditate for 3 hours and they, like, Benny's the worst for this. Fucking BPAC. Love Ben to death, but his morning ritual makes me want to punch myself in the face. So like you'll read about, just for example, just to like lighten the mood, like you'll read about guys that just wake up and start like, just first thing they do is just a rail up their nose, and then it's absent till noon. It's like, all right, time to party.
Right.
What's that book called?
Daily Rituals.
Oh, it's called Daily Rituals. Yeah, shout out John Call. Juji gave me that.
Sounds dope.
Nice.
Where can people find you, buddy?
So Instagram at @the_muscle_doc. Most of the education or all the education stuff is www.pre-script.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. It was cool to do this, man. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, man. Awesome. Catch you later.
Thank you.
See ya.
Cool. Great stuff, man. Great show.
Yeah.
That was dope.
Oh, actually.
Oh, sorry.
Is he-
That's okay. It's okay if he's still there.
Yeah, no, I accidentally muted him, but go ahead.
Oh,
That was very informative, and I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of that. And he also gave you intangibles, things that you can actually go and do, which I think is really important.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you look at a lot of his stuff versus like Phil DeRue or other coaches, like everybody has like their specialty, which they then put onto their athletes that they work with. It's like the depth that he goes into biomechanics, I really don't see that in terms of like, even though there are other great coaches, they don't have that depth of biomechanic knowledge, or I guess maybe they have the knowledge, but they can't explain it like he does, So it's just really interesting seeing the angle that he takes to get everybody towards, I guess, the same type of destination. Yeah.
Have you guys ever heard of anybody explain like the rib cage thing the way he did?
Kelly Starrett.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Kelly Starrett, like, I think he explained it too, but back in Supple Leopard, the rib cage over the hip, I don't know why I don't hear many other people really talk about that. He was someone that did, and I'm like, finally I heard it again, but I don't hear many people speak about that, because that's like that made the biggest difference for me when I started fixing my squat years ago.
Starrett talked a lot about like kind of the relationship or the distance between your belly button and your sternum, and how it shouldn't be like really short and it shouldn't be really far away. Some people can arch really well. Some people are really mobile and they can get in this kind of overextended position, which sometimes with heavy weight, that overextended position can become a neutral position. And so that gets to be confusing too, because you're like, I thought I need to arch into it. And it's like, well, some people do and some people don't. It depends on where you hold the bar, and then you don't want to over arch into it, because whether your back is in the shape of a C going one direction or in the shape of a C going the other direction, you're still going to end up, in either case, you're most likely are going to end up in flexion anyway. That's with your back rounded over. So even if you start with your back super arched, you'll see this sometimes. People try to get in this perfect position, and then they get all fired up and they go to do the lift, and then they end up in this position where they look like they're throwing up into a toilet anyway. your back you're just not as strong. And so neutral spine is what you're always after. We didn't even talk about like head positioning, but your head and your neck, man, I would say that I can't think of anything more important to your breathing than where your head is. Because if your head is down, you got a couple of pounds, depending on how big that noggin is, kind of pulling you down that direction. We're looking at our phones a lot, and that's where you can make an argument for something like a foam roller, or even just getting yourself over a bench and just trying to get in that like pullover position, maybe not even actually doing the pullover movement, but just, getting your body to really open up in that direction. It really makes a lot of sense. And I think it could help people with their breathing. And then on top of that, he talked about movements that you can do in the gym to like enhance all that. And I loved it. I thought that was great information. He talked about Bulgarian split squats and lunges and walking with the weight over your head. And those are all things that are available to all of us. We can all mess with that and see how it works for us.
Yeah. The easiest way to like really understand the whole head placement thing is try to like make a double chin and try to breathe. It's like, see,
yeah,
you're just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I forgot the book that we all read that came out of, but yeah, I don't remember. It's too far gone now.
Book that.
The breathing.
Oh, Oxygen Advantage?
Is that what it was?
Well, if you shove your head back like too much, or if you shove your head back too much, or you're too, or if you're mobile, then you can kind of stifle your breathing a little bit. But if you get your head in a neutral position, I find myself a lot of times I'll kind of like I'll do it here, like I'll lean forward here, right? But when I lean forward, I kind of break at the neck, and then I'm kind of like this, and my chin is forward, and it's like, well, that's a shit, and I won't realize it. And I'm like, oh wait, let me see, kind of organize that a little better. You don't have to get in like this really stiff position, and you don't want to like over exaggerate your posture. But I find myself throughout the day, I got to check myself often because of all the years of bench pressing and building up your arms and just having heavy arms. They're forward, and you kind of like walk around like you're posing all the time, like you're flexing all the time, like you're trying to do the cobra on everybody.
It's those invisible lat syndrome. Can't help it.
But it's really awesome how you mentioned, like, first off, all of those movements, but like, again, single leg, single arm type of movements. That's something that a lot of us tend to just kind of skip. Like, we'll do our big three, we'll maybe do biceps, triceps, and then we'll dip. But those single leg, single arm movements are really super beneficial for those bigger, strong compound movements. They're really great for stability. They're overall just necessary to do. So I'm really happy that he mentioned that. Maybe that'll get more people to start focusing on that.
What do you think in terms of a caloric perspective? You could make the argument that you might use more weight if you were to do, if you were to just use a regular bar and do, let's say, 10 reps, right? But you can also make an argument if you were to do 10 reps single arm, that you would actually be doing 20 reps per set, because you'd be doing 10 and you'd be doing 10 and you wouldn't really need to rest. And so from that standpoint, I mean, you would rest a little bit, but one arm would literally be resting while the other arm's going. And I know we're kind of like nitpicking here, but like for me, from my perspective, I'm thinking like, I like doing those movements more when I'm trying to, get a little bit leaner. But first of all, a lot of times like you try to go from seated to standing as much as possible, just throughout the day and throughout your training. Anytime you have an opportunity to stand, I would say stand. Anytime you have an opportunity to do single arm or single leg, I find it beneficial. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I feel like especially like the demand you're going to feel from that type of movement is going to be more just because you're not as used to it. So if you're doing something like a Bulgarian split squat, you know that if you haven't done a Bulgarian split squat in a long time,
no one wants to do them.
No one likes to do them. But if you haven't done it in a really long time, you feel it a lot during the workout and you feel it a lot the next day, even though it's not as much load as a squat. Like, you might actually feel more sore than you're squatting just because you don't do that much. So I think like there's that initial demand. You'll get used to it. It won't be as bad over time, but lunges always suck. Bulgarian split squats always suck to do. So like when you're saying the
I just
You're
think
saying calorically,
from a metabolic perspective, I think it might be a little bit better, but you could also make the argument that, hey, look, if you just did a squat, you would use a lot more weight, and that would have a metabolic demand as well. But I guess I'm talking about accessory movement versus accessory movement. I think, if you have an opportunity to do lunges over leg extensions, I think the lunges are going to have more caloric demand. And then again, we're nitpicking like how much more. Probably not a crazy amount, but there'll be something in there.
I think they'll just be more useful for you too than a leg extension.
Yeah,
right.
But like, doesn't your heart rate work or go a little bit harder if you're doing like single arm stuff at the same time, like left and right or something like that? I remember.
Well, your heart rate, from what I remember, and I could be way off, but from what I remember, is that your heart rate will increase more with upper body stuff than it does with lower body stuff. It depends. I mean, it would depend on the movement, obviously, but I think it has something to do with how close it is to your heart. So just moving your arms like that, that's the way I was taught. And that's the way I was taught to like warm up. No matter what you're doing, if you warm up through the upper body, it's the quickest way to get warm. It's the quickest way to wake yourself up. Just go in the gym, grab some dumbbells, do a couple lateral raises, do a couple curls, even if you're just squatting for the day. If you feel tired and you feel dead,
right?
Do some lateral raises, do a couple sets of pull downs. That feel great. You get your biceps, you get your back, and it will get that heart rate up. It's an easier, quicker way to get your heart rate up. But obviously, if you were to go in and squat and do like a set of like 30 reps, your heart rate would be going bonkers.
It would.
Yeah, I find the single leg stuff, like on the leg press, that hurts pretty bad. My legs do get sore, but like I feel that a lot in my back. Like it's, I don't know if it's because of the that's
like, a fixed thing. So you would be better off probably with like a lunge or something. It's a machine, right? So the machine is kind of like it's probably shoving you in a position that your body. And Nsima said the key thing there that maybe you're not used to it.
And from what he was saying about like stability too, so maybe I'm like having to torque my body a certain way to get that, like you said, like that stationary thing to go this direction where my body's like, that hurts. So like I start twisting all weird. But
Nsima, what do you think about just like writing off exercise and being like, fuck that, I'm not doing it. Like it just because you don't enjoy it and because it just doesn't feel like it works well with your body.
I mean, I think it kind of depends on the exercise. So like an example would be, if we're going to use an exercise that a lot of people do, the reason why I brought up the bench press when I was talking to Jordan was because I see a lot of people get injured when they're bench pressing because it's a good movement, but it's also like a difficult movement to get the hang of. And if you're not a power lifter, like if you're benching and you're like, God dang, every time I bench, my shoulder hurts and I'm creating an arch, I'm retracting, I'm doing all this, but I still just can't do this movement without always coming out kind of just feeling like shit.
Right.
Maybe you should just focus on doing maybe dumbbell incline presses or flat dumbbell presses. Right. I think sometimes you can just write off an exercise. I kind of have to write off like the bench press currently because my AC joint, it's still not where it should be, but I can dumbbell press and I can progress that and I can incline dumbbell press. I can still do all those movements. So I think that if an exercise is continuing to give you issues and you just can't get it figured out and you're working with other people and it's not working for you, maybe you just got to do something else that's going to hit the same muscle groups.
I agree. And I think sometimes with something like a squat, it might be for somebody else, or a deadlift. So people just have a lot of, I know Andrew's had a history of some back issues and stuff. Now, I would say that doing the movement with lighter weight would be a good idea or some representation of the movement. So I hope people aren't getting us wrong here. We're not saying like, just because we say don't bench press, when we say, maybe you need to write off the bench press, we're talking about a barbell bench press with a regular bar. Maybe there's a different bar you can use. Maybe you can slingshot bench press. Maybe you can bench press with your feet up. Maybe you can do a floor press. Maybe you can do incline dumbbell presses. Maybe you have an option to do some flat dumbbell. There's got to be, you're trying to figure out a way to work your chest. But Nsima is correct, I think, in saying like if you're not powerlifting and you're not responsible for a bench squat and deadlift PR in a competition that's judged by, you got judges and stuff like that there, then I think you don't need to really worry about it. You need to go back to what's the reason why I'm doing this for? oh yeah, that's right. I want to be more fit. Okay. I want to be more fit. I don't necessarily need to bench press with a barbell as my first movement, as heavy as possible. Maybe I can see what kind of weights I can move around that I don't have pain with. And then maybe the bench press is the last exercise you do on your way out the door, just because you want to be able to get back to it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you're like, you know what, I'm just going to do, I don't know, 5 sets of 10 with a plate. It's going to be that's my finisher for the day. I'm going to go in a range of motion. I know Sandro was mentioning when he benches that if he goes down too low, it hurts his shoulder. And I was like, well, just go to wherever it doesn't hurt. And he's like, okay, he's like, but isn't this cheating? I'm like, but for cheating for who? This is your body. This is you doing the movement. It's for you. It's not for, no one else cares. Mm-hmm. So do it in a way that doesn't hurt. And, if you can get to a specialist and have a, chiropractor or somebody, ART specialist or somebody work on it, you don't want to like just shove these things off to the side and never ever think about them again.
Yeah.
And then you don't want, like, I think a sure sign that you need to not avoid them is when it starts to creep into other exercises. So if you're like, I can't bench press, and then maybe like a year later, you're like, man, I'm really struggling with push-ups. Well, now we got it. Now we have an issue, and you might need an MRI, you might need a surgery, but you probably need to address it so that way you're still moving around, still functional.
Yeah, I guess that answers my next question was like, where do you draw the line, or is there a line when, it's like, okay, I can't bench because it hurts my elbow, whatever it is. It's like, okay, now I'm going to dumbbell bench. It's like, well, shit, if I have this, grip, hurts my elbow, but if I turn this way, it feels fine. It's like, okay, now that hurts. Should I go lighter? Like, is it just like, hey, do you need to address this, as opposed to like kind of working around some of the issues that you're finding?
Well, I think it's always necessary to figure out exactly what's going on. Like for me, after we figured out it was my AC joint, like I figured out what I could do with that. I could still bench really light, but I can, when I work with dumbbells, I can still progress the hell out of those. I can still work with pretty heavy weight there. Right. But it's like that AC, it's going to take a while for that to fully go away, if it ever does. So I think at the end of the day, you don't want to just have something like in your knee or your shoulder or your hip, and you just don't know what it is, but you're just working around it forever. If it's something that continues on, I mean, you should try to figure out what it is.
Yeah, I've cut out certain exercises for weeks and months on end. Deadlifts, squats, I've cut them out. I mean, I cut out squats for a while, and my legs just got way bigger. Like it got bigger.
I know, right? Like I hate it when that happens.
Well, they got bigger because of the change of movements. I did other movements and built up more volume through that. Yeah. Because every time I would try to squat, it was just bothering me. It was just hurting. I don't even remember what was bothering me at the time.
Yeah.
And now I've been a little bit. I squatted last week, or this week a little bit. But the whole point is like you're going to find other exercises to really, try to get some stimulation. And, when you're trying to get caught up in an exercise that hurts, you end up taking a lot of time with it. You try to warm up and you keep, quote unquote trying, and we're not trying, we're doing, right. And it just might not be that productive for you. I mean, if you normally need a training weight of 315 or 405, to where you feel like you get a good stimulus from that, and you can only use a plate or 2 plates, you're probably kind of wasting your time with the movement. It's not so bad to do it again at the end of the workout. Maybe it's an off day and you just want to do the movement, because there's always a benefit to do the movement. But it was not going to elicit what you're looking for, and it's not going to give you what you want if you can't do appropriate weights with it. And so therefore you should probably discontinue it and get rid of it for a period of time and come back to it. This, we're in this thing for the long haul. And I think when I got rid of the squats, how much easier is it to get into a workout, to get deep into a workout when you're leg pressing and using the belt squat? That happens immediately. That happens really, really fast. Whereas when you're squatting, you go plate, 2 plates and so on, and it takes a little bit. Sometimes you might have to stretch or move around or warm up, do some mobility drills, maybe even psych yourself up a little bit for a squat workout because they're difficult. But if you come in, the first movement you do is like a leg extension, get some blood flow in your legs. And the first big movement you do is a leg press. and then you progress on to the belt squat, and then you finish the workout off with some sled drags and some farmer's carries, you just fucking crushed yourself.
Yeah.
You had a great workout that's going to most likely elicit some hypertrophy without you having to kill yourself on, a particular movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd say this though. Jordan is super funny. That's one thing I'll say. He really reminded me of Mike Israetel.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, he's smart too. Yeah,
he's smart too. Yeah, and I don't know. I can't get rid of it when he mentioned you over here fighting guys in trench coats. That fucking demolished me. Like I was like, God damn. That was pretty damn good. Yeah. I hope we have him on again because I feel like there's a lot more we can dig out of him.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Andrew, want to take us on out of here, buddy?
Sure will. Thank you, everybody, for checking out today's episode. Sincerely appreciate it. If you guys found some value in it, please share it with a friend. And also, please hit that like button. Subscribe if you're not already here on YouTube. And please follow the podcast at Mark Bell's Power Project on Instagram, at MB Power Project on Twitter. And like I said, we got something pretty cool coming out very soon, so keep an eye out for that. You guys can follow me on Instagram at I am Andrew Z on Instagram and Twitter. Oh, and quick shout out to Free Sleep for sponsoring this episode. Check the links down in the description of the YouTube and Facebook video, as well as the podcast show notes. Code POWER25 for 25% off your order, and as well as free domestic shipping. Nsima, where are you at?
Nsima Inyang on Instagram and YouTube, at Nsima Inyang on Twitter. Mark?
At Mark Smelly Bell. Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch y'all later. Bye.